Look, I'm going to say something that's going to make a lot of people uncomfortable. When a president of the United States threatens to annihilate 90 million people because he doesn't like their government's policy on a shipping lane, that's not a negotiating tactic. That's not strategic ambiguity. That's a threat of genocide. And I don't use that word loosely. I use it because it has a specific legal definition, because it was established as the supreme war crime at Nuremberg by an American prosecutor, and because what is being described, killing an entire civilian population to coerce their government, fits that definition exactly. This is where we are. This is what is happening in your name as an American citizen. And the silence around it is something I genuinely cannot process. I've been doing this for a long time. I've watched administrations make bad decisions. I've watched wars get started on false pretenses. I've watched the gap between what the government says and what is actually happening grow wider and wider over the years. But I have never in my life watched an American president go on social media and threaten the extinction of a civilization. And what makes it worse, what makes it genuinely terrifying, is that this didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of a failure, a specific documented operational failure that the administration is desperately trying to manage the narrative around. And once you understand what that failure actually was, the genocide threat stops sounding like bluster and starts sounding like a cornered man with no options left, reaching for the most dangerous thing within reach. But let me back up, because to understand why we got here, you have to understand what happened in the last 72 hours with this operation that everyone is calling a search and rescue mission, because it wasn't. Here's what I know: 2 MC-130s, Little Bird assault helicopters on board, SEAL Team 6, Delta Force. And here's where the cover story starts to fall apart. SEAL Team 6 and Delta Force don't do combat search and rescue. They can do it, sure. These are the most capable people we have, but it's not their mission. Their mission includes things like nuclear seizure operations, breaching hardened underground facilities, recovering sensitive materials from locations nobody is supposed to know about. And then there were the ID cards found in the wreckage, belonging to people with nuclear expertise. Not para-rescue men, not combat controllers, people with nuclear expertise. So ask yourself the question: why is a Joint Special Operations Task Force, and that's what this was, a JSOTF, which means the National Command Authority sent it, not the regional commander, which means the White House sent it. Why does a JSOTF configured with nuclear specialists and Tier 1 Special Operations Forces get sent on a pilot rescue? The answer is it wasn't a pilot rescue. What I believe happened, based on everything I can piece together from publicly available information, is this. The mission was the Southern Tunnel Complex at Isfahan. There's an air vent. The SEALs and the EOD were going to breach it. Delta was going to go in and secure uranium hexafluoride cylinders and get them out. That was the operation. That's what these aircraft were configured for. The pilot rescue may have been called in as an audible. Maybe the president got nervous about losing the colonel and redirected assets that were already in the air and already configured for Isfahan, which would explain why they were described as grossly overloaded. You don't overload aircraft for a search and rescue, but if you're taking aircraft configured for a completely different, heavier mission and redirecting them into something else mid-operation, you get overloaded aircraft, and then the planes bog down. And then Iranian anti-aircraft fire damages the second one, and the whole thing has to be called off. And here's the part that genuinely stuns me, because this is a level of operational incompetence that I haven't seen in my career. The operation was compromised before anyone stepped on a plane. Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, went to Congress in open session and told them that the intelligence community has, quote, a good idea where the Iranian uranium is. Think about that. Think about being an Iranian intelligence officer listening to that. The person running American intelligence just told you publicly that they know where your most sensitive material is stored. So what do? You harden your defenses around it. You prepare for the raid you now know is coming. And then the Wall Street Journal publishes an article on March 29th with operational details: airfield seizure, multi-day underground facility operation, the whole architecture of what the raid would look like. Iran didn't need to intercept any classified communications. We gave them the mission brief in the American press. This was never going to work. It was doomed from the moment Gabbard opened her mouth in that hearing room, and I want to sit with that for a second because the implications are enormous. If you are genuinely planning to run a covert operation to seize Iranian nuclear material, your job as Director of National Intelligence is to go to Congress and say the exact opposite of the truth. We have no idea where the uranium is. We're still looking. We don't even know where we'd begin. Now the Iranians drop their guard. Now you create ambiguity about whether the operation is even being contemplated. Instead, we told them we knew where it was. We told them we were planning to take it, and the newspapers filled in the tactical details. The surges out of Pope Air Force Base, Hunter Airfield, Fort Bragg, the various locations where these specialized units are stationed, all of it visible, all of it documented in open source, all of it telling any competent Iranian intelligence analyst exactly what the composition of the task force looked like before it even landed. This wasn't a special operation. This was a surprise party that the guest of honor was told about 3 weeks in advance. So the operation fails. And now a president who has no military option left is sitting at his desk posting genocide threats on Truth Social. And this is where I have to be really direct, because the nuclear language coming out of this administration is not abstract. The vice president said there are tools in the toolbox that haven't been used yet. In the context of a discussion about civilization-ending strikes, that's a nuclear reference. There's no other honest reading of it. And if we're talking about preemptive nuclear use against a country that has no nuclear weapons, against a civilian population to coerce a government into giving up a strategic waterway, that's not just a war crime. That's every war crime simultaneously. Distinction: nuclear weapons don't distinguish between combatants and civilians. Proportionality: Iran is holding the straight. That is not an act that justifies the nuclear annihilation of 90 million people. Collective punishment: threatening an entire population for the decisions of their government is the textbook definition. Robert Jackson said it at Nuremberg: war of aggression is the supreme war crime because all other war crimes flow from it. We started this war, and we are now threatening the final crime in the sequence that Jackson described. And I need to say something about the American military here directly, because this matters. The generals who receive these orders need to understand something very clearly. If you obey an order that constitutes genocide, you will be held accountable for it. There will be no refuge, not rank, not following orders. Those defenses were explicitly rejected at Nuremberg, and they will be rejected again. The principle that a soldier must obey lawful orders does not extend to unlawful ones. And an order to use nuclear weapons preemptively against a civilian population to coerce their government is not a lawful order. It is a crime. And the officer who executes it becomes a criminal. Full stop. And where's Congress? We've got Marjorie Taylor Greene and one other member calling for the 25th Amendment. That's it. The cabinet hasn't resigned. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs hasn't walked into the Oval Office and said these orders can't be executed. The institutional constraints that are supposed to exist for exactly this kind of moment are not functioning. And the American public is going to work every morning as if this is normal. I want to be fair here. Most people are not following the operational details of this conflict. They are watching the price of gas. They are watching the grocery bill. They are watching their 401k. And those things are all real consequences of what is happening in the Persian Gulf right now. But the connection between those numbers and a president posting annihilation threats on social media is not being explained to them by the people whose job it is to explain it. As if a president threatening genocide is a news cycle that gets replaced by the next one. It isn't. This is an existential moment, and we are sleepwalking through it. Now, let me tell you about the military options, because I know there are voices saying, well, there must be something we can do. There isn't. General Kellogg wants to seize Kish Island. And look, physically, yes, 2 battalion landing teams can get ashore. Marines fight, we're good at it. But then what? The Iranian mainland is right there. You can almost see it from Kish. Missiles, drones, rockets, they just keep coming. You can't resupply a position under constant bombardment. You can't hold it indefinitely. And here's the thing nobody seems to want to say about Kish Island. Taking it won't open the strait. The strait isn't closed because Iran controls Kish Island. It's closed because Lloyd's stopped writing insurance policies, because ship captains won't sail their crews into a war zone, because the commercial infrastructure of that corridor has collapsed. The commercial calculation that makes global shipping possible through Hormuz doesn't reset because Marines occupy an Iranian island. You need time and demonstrated safety before the private sector comes back. Neither of those things are provided by a military occupation. What about a ground campaign? We don't have the forces. You need a division-sized Marine Expeditionary Force just to establish a foothold, followed by 150 to 200,000 Army soldiers to actually conduct operations inside Iran at a scale that matters. We have nothing close to that. What we have in theater would get chewed up, and we'd be extracting them under fire while the whole thing becomes a political catastrophe at home. Iran has been preparing for a ground invasion for 25 years, not 25 months. 25 years, underground command facilities, dispersed drone production, weapons designed specifically for close combat in mountainous terrain, the population of 90 million people who understand that this is a war for their survival and are not going to roll over. There's no ground option that ends well. So if there's no military option and the nuclear threat is a crime, what actually exists? The diplomatic off-ramp. And it has a specific shape. Iran has said it will operate under IAEA safeguards. It just has to be allowed to enrich. You know what the American position should be? Go back to the JCPOA, the deal that was working before we tore it up in 2018. That's it. Return to verified compliance, lift sanctions, let Iran sell its oil. The JCPOA wasn't perfect. No agreement is, but it was producing compliance. The IAEA was verifying. Iran was inside the enrichment limits. It was working. And then a political decision blew it up, and here we are years later with a war that never needed to happen. The sanctions that were reimposed after the 2018 withdrawal didn't bring Iran to its knees. They brought Iran to the negotiating table with North Korea. They drove the very proliferation cooperation that produced the Fatah II. Maximum pressure produced maximum capability in the adversary it was supposed to contain. That is the record. And the people who designed that policy are now watching its consequences play out in a conflict they did not model accurately and cannot resolve on the terms they publicly committed to. And on the reconstruction question, because Iran's infrastructure has been destroyed, and they're not going to pretend that didn't happen. The United States doesn't write a reparations check. That's politically impossible, and everyone knows it. But Iran can set up a toll collection mechanism at the Strait. Commercial vessels pay a transit fee. That money goes toward reconstruction costs agreed to by the UN. When the bill is paid, the mechanism ends and the Strait reverts to international management. It's not a trophy. It's not a dramatic victory speech, but it's something both sides can describe in language their domestic audiences can accept. Trump can stand at a podium and say he accomplished something no previous president accomplished. He ended Iran's nuclear weapons potential verifiably. He got the IAEA back in. He brought American forces home. Whether anyone believes the framing is a separate question. The point is the structure exists. What doesn't exist is the courage to take it instead of reaching for threats that, if executed, would make the United States the greatest genocide state in modern history. Now, I want to say something about Iran directly, because this analysis only hits half the picture if I don't. The Iranian people in the streets telling their government to hold the course, they're right that they've been wronged. They're right that this war was unjust from the moment the first American aircraft crossed into Iranian airspace. They're right that they're winning by every military and economic metric that matters. The Strait of Hormuz is closed. American bases have been evacuated. The interceptor stockpiles are depleted. The covert operation just failed completely. By every measure, Iran is prevailing. And they need to understand something about what winning all the way to the end looks like, because it isn't pretty. Every day this conflict continues, Iran's energy infrastructure takes more damage. Its chemical plants, its oil production, its industrial base, all of it is being degraded. And the market that Iran's oil used to supply doesn't wait. Russia is already signing contracts with Iran's former customers. Russia is a partner and an ally, but not the kind of partner that gives away half its paycheck indefinitely. The market share that Iran held before this war is being absorbed by others right now while the fighting continues. Even if sanctions are lifted tomorrow, even if Iran plugs back into the international economy, it plugs back into a market that is already rerouted around it. And there's a harder truth. The United States is a nuclear-armed nation. We will use nuclear weapons before we allow ourselves to collapse. That's just a fact of American strategic doctrine, and it has been since Hiroshima. Iran cannot strategically defeat the United States. What Iran can do is make the cost of this war unsustainable and force an exit. It has essentially already done that. The exit terms that are available right now: JCPOA compliance, sanctions lifted, Hormuz toll mechanism, full international reintegration. Those are genuinely good terms for Iran. They are better than what Iran had before February 28th. They represent a genuine strategic victory. But the longer the fighting continues, the more infrastructure is destroyed, and the more the victory, when it comes, looks like winning a fight in a building that's burning down around you. Finding the formula now, while Iran can still function as a full member of the international community, while its economy can still be rebuilt into something that delivers what the government has been promising its people for decades, that's not weakness, that's wisdom. I've spent my career in and around the institutions of American national security. I know what good intelligence looks like, and I know what operational discipline looks like. What I'm watching right now is neither. What I'm watching is a president with no options left threatening genocide on a social media platform while a failed special operation sits smoking on an Iranian airfield. The window for ending this rationally is still open. Not for long, but it's still there. And on the American side, the question is not whether there is a military solution, because there isn't. The question is whether the people around this president have the courage to tell him that clearly enough, firmly enough, that he puts down the nuclear language and picks up the phone. Because the alternative to a negotiated exit is not a military victory. The alternative to a negotiated exit is a crime. And crimes have consequences that last longer than administrations.